We'll kick off the meeting. It is December 4th, 2017. This, of course, is Owen Sound City Council. We did not have a closed meeting tonight, so we're starting right now. So I guess one's off the list. Two's off the list. Additional items, Council? Councillor Dodd?
Thank you, Worship. I have two items, one about the upcoming cultural awards and the upcoming Parks and Recreation facilities presentation for the draft master plan.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Lemon?
Yes, Your Worship, I have one item, raising money for the food bank.
Thank you. Councillor McManaman, do I see your hand up?
Yes, you did. Thank you, Worship. Just a question to the city manager about the future of the courthouse and the jail.
Anyone else? Seeing none. So disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Anyone? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes.
Moved by myself, Councillor Gregg, seconded by Councillor Lemon, that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on November 20th, 2017 as printed be adopted.
All in favor? That is carried. Number 6 is the resolution.
Moved by myself, Councillor Gregg, seconded by Councillor Kepke, that City Council now go into committee of the whole to consider public meetings, deputations, public question period, matters arising from correspondence, reports, matters tabled, motions for which notice was previously given, and other business.
And all in favor? That is carried. So we are now in committee of the whole. Down to number 7, which is a public meeting. Councillor Gregg's got the motion to suspend.
Moved by myself, that the regular council meeting of December 4th, 2017 be suspended for the public meeting respecting declaring surplus and disposing municipal property known as Part 2, Plan 16R4173, located at the west side of 16th Avenue East at 23rd Street East.
All in favor? And that is carried. So I now declare this public meeting open.
Through you, Your Worship, notice of the public meeting was posted on the city's website and published in the Sun-Times on November 24th. No comments have been received. Anyone in attendance for the public meeting, please sign the sign-in sheet located on the table just inside the door. Personal information collected at this public meeting is collected under the authority of the Municipal Act and will be used by members of council and City of Owen Sound staff in the review of this matter. Questions about this collection should be addressed to myself, Brianna Bloomfield, City Clerk. If you wish to be notified of the decision of the Corporation of the City of Owen Sound, you must make a written request to the City of Owen Sound, care of the City Clerk.
Good, thank you. So Ms. Coulter's up next.
Thank you. If you could just... Thank you, Worship. As the clerks mentioned, the focus of tonight is to obtain public input on the city's intention to dispose certain lands on 16th Avenue East. The city has been working to dispose of lands that are surplus to their needs, and a number of properties have been listed for sale with Chestnut Park Realty. The city does have an offer on the lands that are subject to the meeting tonight. The city's land sale bylaw prescribes a certain process respecting the sale of lands, and this site has never been formally declared surplus by bylaw. So the subject property is located on the west side of 16th Avenue East, north of 20th Street, and just at where the road bends to be 23rd Street. The property has about 109 meters of frontage on 16th Avenue and is about 4.7 acres in area. In terms of surrounding land uses, the subject property is shown in red. We have some residential development further north. The Union Gas Depot is north and east. Sprung's Transport is to the south, and other industrial uses are across 16th Avenue further to the east. In terms of the official plan, the property is designated employment, and the employment designation permits the development of the lands for a wide range of uses, including manufacturing, assembly, fabricating, processing, packaging, printing, warehouses, as well as uses that are ancillary to employment uses. The zoning bylaw zones the property M1, or light industrial, and it permits a variety of light industrial uses. There's a long list, but it would include things like offices, rental uses, storage within enclosed buildings, etc. Any change to the zoning that would be required would be subject to a full and public process. In terms of the process to date, on November 20th, Council had considered a staff report and had directed that staff provide notice and afford the public an opportunity to comment on the city's intention to declare these lands surplus, that we would post a notice on the website and in the Sun-Times, and that pending the outcome of tonight's public meeting, we would bring forward a bylaw to declare the land surplus, and that the method of disposition which was prescribed in the notice would be by a real estate listing. So the notice appeared in the Sun-Times on November 24th, and it was also listed on the city's website. That brings us to tonight, December 4th. The focus of this public meeting is to obtain any public input. Following tonight's meeting, staff would prepare a report summarizing that input and bring it forward to your meeting on December 18th. So unless there's any questions, Your Worship, we'd like to hear from any public who are in attendance.
Seeing no questions from us. So this is an opportunity for the public to speak to this. Do you have a statement on this? No, I'm going, okay. Members of the public to speak to this matter, if they wish to, we would need your name and address, and you need to come to the podium and push the little button so the red light comes on. So if there's anyone here that wishes to speak to this matter, now is the time. And I'm seeing nobody coming, so I think we can declare the public meeting closed then. And motion.
Moved by myself, Councillor Gregg, that the regular council meeting of December 4th, 2017 be reconvened.
All in favor? That is carried. Thanks, Scott. So that is 7A. Over to the next page in the agenda, 8 deputations. First off, we welcome David Huff, Curator of Collections at the Tom Thompson Art Gallery, with regard to the West Wind. Welcome. I'll get you to push the little button there on the, there.
Mayor and Council, I am David Huff, Curator of Collections at the Tom Thompson Art Gallery. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about a very special guest who is in Owen Sound. The West Wind. You will not hear about this blustery gale in the Weather Network. The West Wind is not a strange weather pattern, but it is Tom Thompson's iconic painting. The West Wind is one of Canada's most famous paintings. In fact, it may be the single most recognizable artwork by a Canadian artist there is. The painting is on loan to the Tom from the Art Gallery of Ontario. The West Wind was acquired by the AGO in 1926 and has since become internationally known as a Canadian icon. For many people, this painting represents the essence of Canadian enduring spirit. One of the last major canvases painted by Tom Thompson over the winter of 1916-17, the West Wind is rumored to have been on the easel of Thompson's Toronto studio when he left for Algonquin Park in the spring of 1917, never to return. Its first public exhibition was at the Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto just weeks after Thompson died, under the title West Wind, Algonquin Park. Since then, it has traveled around the world several times, being featured in various exhibitions in London, Paris, Tokyo, Berlin, and St. Petersburg. The first public exhibition of this painting in Owen Sound was held in 1922, just down the street from where the gallery is, at the Women's Christian Temperance Union Hall at the corner of 1st Avenue and 9th Street West. May 1st edition of The Sun states that this new exhibition of Thompson's works includes the famous pictures Spring Ice, Northern River, the Jack Pine, and further down in the article, and I find this kind of funny, is the now famous West Wind is listed under other beautiful scenes. By 1968, the painting has become much more famous and was included in the gallery's first anniversary exhibition alongside the Jack Pine. A few years later, in 1977, the West Wind returned to Owen Sound and was featured in an exhibition celebrating the 100th anniversary of Thompson's birth. Now, 40 years since the last appearance here, the West Wind returns as part of the exhibition called East Wind, West Wind, in conjunction with First Nations artist Maria Hepfield's mural, which explores the idea of nationhood from various different perspectives. Not only is West Wind Canada's most well-known painting, it has probably had more written about it than any other Canadian painting. It has been a source of inspiration for numerous newspaper articles, essays, books, theater, TV, movies, documentary, and music. Its reproductions can be found on t-shirts, magnets, coffee mugs, and light switch covers. The undulating shape of the tree is familiar to us, but most of us only know this painting from reproductions. This is a rare opportunity to see one of Canada's most famous paintings in person in Owen Sound. The interest in Thompson, his art, and the mysterious death has continued to grow. People come from all over the world to Owen Sound to see this collection, our collection of Thompson's paintings. As well, from time to time, paintings from our collection travel to other galleries across the country and around the world. 3 of our Tom Thompson paintings traveled to the d'Orsay Museum in Paris last winter. This David Millen painting from our collection is going to a gallery in London, England in January, and then travels as part of the exhibition to Vancouver before being shown at the McMichael next fall. Tom Thompson's Morning, along with Northern Lights and Algonquin Park, all from our collection, were part of the Mystical Landscapes exhibition last fall at the Art Gallery of Ontario. Oh, and there is West Wind in the background. Don't forget that it's here only until January 7th. There's always lots to see and do at the gallery. Exhibitions are always changing. This is your public gallery, open to everyone, so come and visit soon, and visit often.
Good. Thank
Any
you, David.
questions?
Questions? Anyone?
Thank you for your time.
So the West Wind is there, you said, until January 7th,
January 7th.
and the hours of the gallery are?
The hours of the gallery are from 11 until 5, Tuesday through Friday, Saturday and Sunday from noon until 5.
Noon till 5 and Saturday and Sunday, and 11 till 5, Tuesday to Friday.
Weekends are noon till 5.
Good. Good, so there's an opportunity to go down, check it out, and then check out the Northern Lights after that, perhaps.
And we have 3 new reproductions of Thompson works as part of the Northern Lights display. They're right across from the gallery, and they're pretty cool as well.
Good, thank you very much. There wasn't any, oh, there is a question, David. It came late. Councillor Lambert.
Did I do that?
No?
Just one comment. Many years ago, I saw the West Wind at the AGO, and there's something about that painting that is incredible. And if you haven't seen it in its original state, see it. It's well worth the time, and parents, bring your kids, because they'll all of a sudden get very excited about what art can do.
Thank you.
Just in response to that, it is wonderful to see it, and it's home at the AGO. One of the things that makes it extremely remarkable here is that a lot of times people have the opportunity to see the work all on their own. And so it's quite amazing to be in that space and just having a look at the painting on your own. So there aren't the huge big crowds that are sometimes at the AGO. We are busy, and there's certainly lots more people who have been coming through to see this, but it is a rare opportunity to see this painting here in Owen Sound.
David, did you say it's only the 4th time it's been in Owen Sound?
It's the 4th time in the last 100 years.
Wild. Good, thank you. So next, we have a deputation from Levac Management Consulting Group. So it's Joe Levac and Roger Hollingsworth that are here to present their review of the OPP costing. Also acknowledge we have Chief Sornberger and senior officers. We have Owen Sound Police Services Board Garth Pierce and Bill Twaddle here. President, Vice President of the Owen Sound Police Services, and I understand the majority of the members are back at the police station watching Rogers Cable as if they're at home, probably with popcorn and stuff instead of coming down. So if the room looks less full than what you may be expected, they're over there watching. So we just make that point. So welcome.
Good evening, Council, Your Worship. Thanks so much for having Roger and I here with you today. We have been working over the last 3 months to prepare this analysis for you, looking at the proposal from the OPP to take over policing here in Owen Sound and comparing not only the costs of that proposal versus the costs of the Owen Sound Police Service, but also the services, the organization themselves as well, so that there's a full apples-to-apples comparison between the organizations. In terms of our agenda tonight, speak a little bit about who Roger and I are, and then we're going to get into talking a little bit about what we were, the task that we were charged with, and then start to talk a little bit about our results, and we will have an opportunity for questions as well. However, if something is burning during the course of the presentation that anybody would like to ask, by all means, if that's acceptable for your protocol here at Owen Sound Council, then that's fine for Roger and I as well. I've been working in the management field now for more than 25 years, currently working as an independent consultant for the last 8 in both the public and private sectors, a fair amount of work in the municipal police sector, as well as clients in the manufacturing, construction, agriculture, and high-tech sectors as well. Roger has over 40 years of experience in the policing world. You can see there that he began as a constable in the town of Preston. I'll let you do the math in terms of when that was. Worked through the Waterloo Regional Police to become the deputy chief, and also worked for a number of years as the assistant deputy minister for policing services through the Ministry of the Solicitor General, and where Roger and I met in the small town of Amherstburg down in southwestern Ontario, where he served as the chief of police for 5 years before he decided to call it a day and start working a little bit more with me. The City of Owen Sound undertook to obtain an OPP costing proposal and asked for us, Roger and I, to come in and analyze that proposal versus the current Owen Sound Police Services, and as I mentioned earlier, provide an apples-to-apples comparison. In terms of the research that Roger and I went through to prepare this for you this evening, we looked at the Police Services Act as well as any other relevant legislation. The documents we looked at included the submissions from the OPP as well as additional information that we were able to get from them while we were going through our process, as well as the information that we received from the Owen Sound Police Service itself, including their budgets, personnel information, individual counts of different employees in different classifications, so that we were able to be as accurate as possible. We also had the opportunity to hold interviews with the OPP and the Owen Sound Police Service, and we're able to have conversations with the police associations as well. Roger?
Your Worship and Council, I'm going to take you through some services and organization comparisons. And before I get started, I would like to first say that, clarify that in our opinion, all of the services provided by the OPP and the Owen Sound Police Service meet or exceed the provincial adequacy standards. And many of the differences in the first two, services and organization, you'll find where we will say that they are comparable, and where we feel that there is a slight advantage to the people of Owen Sound or in the operation of the police service, we will point that out with a saying that we think the advantage is OPP or the advantage is Owen Sound Police Service. So the first comparisons we're doing are the service comparisons, and we have done these, I should say again, by alphabetical order. Auxiliary Police Unit. Quickly, the Owen Sound Police Service has a 23-person unit. The OPP have their own unit. They get permission to expand that through the division commander. But right now, there is no guarantee how big that or how much that would happen and how many people would transfer over or could apply and become an auxiliary. So basically, the unit here under an OPP would be disbanded, and then there's no guarantee how many people would be picked up by the OPP. So that's why we have an advantage to the Owen Sound Police Service. And I say there's a bird in hand gets the advantage in this case. Some of these I can go through fairly quickly. The such things as breath analysis are comparable, no material difference. You wouldn't see any difference in either service. Officers are all trained the same with the same equipment, those kinds of things. The next one is a K-9 unit. Now, the Owen Sound Police Service does not maintain a K-9 unit of their own, but they do have access through what we call service agreements with the OPP. That's how they meet adequacy. Now, the OPP, because they own the unit, and there would be probably one less phone call to have to make to get the service, we give that as an advantage to the OPP. And you're going to see a number of those different things like that in here. Collision reconstruction. The Owen Sound Police Service has 2 officers trained to level 2, 1 to level 3. The OPP also have locally trained officers in the same levels that work out locally. The reason we're giving an advantage to OPP here is because those collision reconstruction experts are backed up by higher level ones at the regional and provincial levels within the OPP. So the advantage is, in our estimation, is OPP in that category. Now, the communication center, Owen Sound, as you know, has their own with local staff and knowledge adding to the local economy. The Owen Sound Communication Center generates a significant income to offset the police budget. And the OPP Communications Center, as you probably are aware, would be in London and serves a large geographical area. Our estimation, that advantage is to the Owen Sound Police Service. Community and school services. The Owen Sound have many excellent school and community programs. I've got up there including but not limited to the operation of their Positive Choice Community Village, which I thought was quite interested in that. That's quite a feat. But the OPP have advised that all current programs would be maintained in consultation with the Police Services Board. So in our estimation, you wouldn't notice there's comparable, no material differences in that area between the services. The next one under services is the community storefront. The OPP advised that they don't really support community police offices. They would, however, if the Owen Sound Board wanted to continue, it can be discussed and would be an added expense. And again, with my principle of bird in hand, it's there now and it's in the budget of the current Owen Sound Police Service, so the advantage there is to the Owen Sound Police Service. Next one is court security and administration. The staffing models between them are similar in numbers. We believe, it's our belief, that you wouldn't really notice any difference in that function. So we've rated it as a comparable, no material difference. There is a belief that the OPP are going to put a sergeant in charge. But we have looked at that, and the current way the Owen Sound operates with a special constable is more cost effective. So And we don't want to get into the argument of whether a police officer or a civilian is better in that position. So people will have their own opinions about that. However, our bottom line is we believe that the operations, you wouldn't notice any major difference in the operation of the courts under OPP or Owen Sound. Excuse me. The crime analysis I've set up there is just it's a normal function of any investigative division. Okay, so that's comparable, no material differences. Crime prevention. Both services have excellent crime prevention programs, and OPP have advised they would continue with current or similar crime prevention initiatives, so we rate this as comparable, no material differences between them. This is a little heavier screen. Criminal Intelligence. Criminal Intelligence Service of Ontario is a body that's run out of the Ministry of the Policing, out of the Policing Services Division, and Owen Sound has direct attendance through the chief on the governing body and one officer that attends the operating body meetings. So the OPP model drives intelligence gathering and projects to specialized units and to higher levels in the organization. So in our thinking, the fact that the Owen Sound that we currently constituted has a direct singularly emphasized area that they can go in directly with just Owen Sound's information and wants and needs under the criminal intelligence area. So we feel that that's an advantage to the Owen Sound Police Service. Now, we've titled this one Criminal Investigation / Crime Unit because what this function is the detectives and investigating of local crime and break-and enters and thefts and any number of those things, and they basically work under two different models. Owen Sound has 6 investigators and 1 supervisor, all under the Criminal Investigations branch, but they call them CIB and CORE and Drug Intelligence. The OPP have a local crime unit doing basically the same functions, and they've proposed that they would increase the crime unit by 5 investigators, and that they would maintain, at least at the start of the contract, the 2 core officer positions in Owen Sound. So we believe they're comparable and no major material differences. They're going to do the same work. It's just a different model that they're doing it under. The emergency response, again, this is a function that Owen Sound gets adequacy through the service level agreements with the OPP. OPP own various level, as you probably know, of emergency response and would have access to them, we consider, with one less phone call, so that's an advantage to the OPP. Now the next one, forensic identification and SACO. SACO is what we call scenes of crime officer, which is a little less, well, a fair amount less training than a full identification officer. Owen Sound has a full-time special constable position and one constable that can do full identification. The OPP would be open to maintaining the 5 scenes of crime officers. The OPP have full identification services, but they're again deployed regionally and provincially. So we think there's a slight advantage to the Owen Sound Police Service because they don't have to, right now, they wouldn't have to phone the detachment commander or go to a higher level to get the full identification services to come in. So in our estimation, it gives a slight advantage to the Owen Sound Police Service. Major crime investigations. Under this mandate, the OPP have a province-wide mandate in this field, and the trained staff and experience, and again with quicker access. Again, Owen Sound through shared services can get that with a phone call, but the advantage is, in our estimation, is OPP, and if you're wondering what that is, that's homicides, multiple homicides, terrorism, multi-jurisdiction major crime cases, things like that. That the OPP will have a mandate to look after in the province. Taxi cab licensing speaks for itself. The OSPS, right now, the Owen Sound Police look after this function for the municipality of Owen Sound, and the OPP have indicated that they do not wish to carry on this function, so an advantage to the Owen Sound Police Service. Again, this is the same as some of the other things. A public order unit is the Owen Sound Service has, again, through shared services agreement, can access a public order unit from the OPP. The OPP are the owners of the unit, and process to obtain should be easier, so an advantage to the OPP. Traffic enforcement, all patrol officers are part of their regular duties are to do traffic enforcement. Owen Sound's model has all their patrol officers are assigned to doing traffic enforcement. They have 2 part-time officers that they dedicate to selected problems in selected areas. OPP won't have the 2 part-time, but because they're are quoting more overall patrol officers, it's our estimation that the extra time that those extra patrol officers would be doing traffic sort of equalizes with what Owen Sound is doing right now. So we've said they're comparable, no material differences. We think the traffic enforcement would be about the same. Next service comparison, underwater recovery. This is recovery of evidence and weapons and things like that you need we used to call them scuba team, but OSPS has the gain through shared services agreement. They can get the service from the OPP, but the OPP own the unit and would have maybe quicker, more direct access, so advantage to the OPP. Uniform patrol. Based sheerly on numbers alone, we give the advantage to the OPP as they have bid that they will put 6 constables and 1 sergeant on each of the platoons, whereas Owen Sound has 5 and 1. So that's just based on numbers alone. Should be an advantage to the OPP. Victim assistance, the Owen Sound has a local victim assistance organization working out of the police station. Speaking to the OPP, they advise that this working arrangement, such as the above, could continue under an OPP contract, so we consider that comparable, no material differences. We're going to now look at some of the organization comparisons. And again, alphabetically, the first one is the Accident Reporting Center. The Owen Sound Police Service, as you know, has a privately contracted reporting center out of the police station. The OPP do not support accident reporting centers, so the advantage is the OSPS on the fact that they at least have the option of keeping it or not keeping it, where you wouldn't with the OPP. Our next one is a pretty major one, is that we call accountability and responsiveness. And it's our estimation that a contract, and from what we've talked when we've talked to other police agencies, is that it's more of a cooperative relationship than an employer and employee situation. The OPP provincial policy can take precedence over local priorities in certain situations. A board can hire and fire and direct a chief under the Police Services Act. So, and local policies can be developed basically by either, but the board does get some input into the OPP commander selection, usually from an offering of OPP selected candidates. But it's still our estimation that the advantage in accountability and responsiveness goes to the local Owen Sound Police Service. This one is comparable, no material differences on the annual report. The chief must prepare one, the OPP commander prepares a similar one under section 10. So we rated that you wouldn't notice any real difference. Business planning is the same thing, both OPP and municipal, you have to have a 3-year business plan developed. So again, comparable, no material differences there. There's a section 49 in the Police Act about secondary employment, keeping the board informed. Both chief and OPP commanders are required to do that. So again, it's another area that we would think there wouldn't be any differences between the services. There we go. The next organization comparison we wanted to talk about was economies of scale. Obviously, an advantage to an organization the size of the OPP compared to the size of Owen Sound in terms of replacing absent members or responding to large-scale situations and absorbing unbudgeted expenses. The next topic is human resource management. And again, we believe this is an advantage to the OPP because they pick up all the ongoing human resource issues and costs on a go-forward basis associated with any staff that become OPP employees. The complaint process, which is the OIPRD, which stands for the Office of the Independent Police Review Director. Both, again, the chief and commander are responsible for reporting regularly to the board. So that situation, you wouldn't, we've rated it comparable, no material differences. The board wouldn't notice anything different there. The Owen Sound Police Service keeps well-documented response times and calls for service by levels of severity of calls. And the OPP by policy do not report on response times, so we think a slight advantage to Owen Sound Police Service that they do have those stats. So my next slide is a graphic prediction of what we just went through. This is the first of 3 slides, and as you can see where there's a little plus, that's we think that police service has an advantage. Where there's no plus, it's where they're comparable, no material differences. So we just thought we'd put those up in a more graphic format for you. There's 2 slides on the services, operational services, that one. And the second one is there. And we've done the same thing now with the next slide, which is the organization differences. And you can again see where there's a plus. We think that there's a little advantage. And where there's nothing, they're the same. And I should say that we don't, there's no sense or value, we think, in doing a tally of the pluses, because each element is, it's hard to measure. Some elements are more valuable than others, and the weight of each is really dependent on the needs and the profile of the community and the police department that you want. So my next slide is a staffing comparison, and what we wanted to do was bring it down to how many people and positions would be affected through an OPP contract, and we've got it on one slide. Basically, if you look at the difference on the right, I probably should first say that we count part-time employees as half of a full-time equivalent. So that's how we can. You can see 13 becomes 6.5 if they're part-time, and we wanted to bring it down maybe to the bottom difference, I guess, when you look at it, in the bottom right corner, it says minus 23. So what that is saying is there would be 23 full-time equivalent positions gone. In people, if you wanted to put that into people, if you look at under civilians, the minus 17 full-time, and then there's 13 part-time that on the civilians alone, which brings in people, you're looking at 30 less jobs, I guess you could say, 30 people that would be out. And that's at I should add that that's at the bare minimum, because there's also other issues that Joe will speak to later on about the fact that some officers and some special constables might not get picked up by the OPP. So 30 people would be the least that would probably lose their employment.
Can I ask a question?
Here's a question there, Roger.
Just a question. Thank you. Through the mayor, to you, please. So the 23 people, the majority of those people are in our communication center, right?
Civilians, yes.
Yes.
Yes, a lot of them are in the communications.
It's the communication center you're
Yes.
talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Out of all the civilians, there's, as you can see, there's 20 full-time. The OPP are only going to pick up 3 at the most full-time, and none of the part-time. So you end up with the 30 people that, whether they're part-time or full-time, that the jobs would be cut. And like I said, there is we'll speak to later the amount of the fact that there are probably constables and special constables may not get picked up by the OPP.
Moving on to the financial issues, a number of items that we'd like to speak to relatively efficiently, I hope, starting to talk to you a little bit about the assumptions that we needed to make in order to be able to do the financial analysis. Some caveats, very important that we speak a little bit about some of the impacts of those assumptions and the potential impacts of what they may mean. We also encountered, as we were working our way through the process, a number of questions around the dispatch business that the Owen Sound Police Service is engaged in providing dispatch services to other emergency services organizations around the province. And so we'd like to speak a little bit about that and what it means to the Owen Sound Police Service and its budget, and the contracts themselves, the contracts to provide those dispatching services to those other municipalities. Moving into the direct issues with respect to the financial implications of the OPP proposal, talking about the one-time costs, the upfront year one costs of making the transition to the OPP, the ongoing costs, the things that will happen in terms of paying the OPP for their services provided to the community, both under the transition agreement the first 3 years and under the provincial formula starting in year 4 and moving beyond that. And then, of course, the legacy costs as well, those costs that will continue to be borne by the City of Owen Sound, regardless of whether it goes with an OPP or stays with the Owen Sound Police Service as it exists. And then finally, looking at the 10-year projection and what that all that other information all boils down to. So in terms of our assumptions, we started off by looking at the 2017 Owen Sound Police Service budget and the 2017 OPP submission as the base of what we were comparing. And we applied a consistent inflation factor of 2.5% for each year beyond 2017. And we also added at the end of the presentation for you a consideration of the net present value calculations, again using a 2.5% factor with that as well. When it came to estimating the cost of severance for the individuals that would be left without employment if the city were to choose to go to the OPP, what we did there was we considered what the best and worst case scenarios would look like in terms of the 3 civilians that would be offered employment, and we averaged the difference between the two. So there is a little bit of play in there, but without knowing exactly who would be offered employment at what levels, we figured that was the fairest way to be able to calculate out what the severance costs would actually look like. Because there is a fair amount of money that needs to be spent in year 1, if the city were to go to the OPP, we understand that there would be a need to borrow some money to be able to cover those costs in years 1, 2, and 3. And we understand that the city has access to capital at a rate of 2.91%, so we built that into our formula as well. And we've also based all of this, and I'll speak to this a little bit further as we move into the presentation, but for the purposes of our calculations, we did make the assumption that 100% of all uniformed staff and all special constables would be hired by the OPP. We don't believe that would necessarily be the case, but we don't have any factual basis to assume any other number other than 100%, but recognizing that there may be some difference, there would likely be a less than 100% that would be offered employment in the event that the OPP were to take over policing in Owen Sound.
Just before you jump, Joe, if I can interrupt you there, can you explain to us what net present value is, just to make sure we're on the same page?
What we did is we looked at what the value of $1 today would be in comparison to 2027, so 10 years out. So today $1 isn't what $1 was 10 years ago. By applying net present value calculations, we're actually projecting that out into the future as well.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of the caveats, wanted to point out that the current numbers that we're working with do not include any contract enhancements. If there were to be any contract enhancements, for example, the maintenance of the storefront, as Roger had discussed a little bit earlier, those would be subject to additional discussions, negotiations, agreement on pricing, and obviously we weren't able to account for that as well. The second caveat is that we have calculated in salvage value for the capital assets that are currently held by the Owen Sound Police Service, excluding the building. So things such as vehicles, computers, police-specific equipment such as body armor, firearms, holsters, radios, those kinds of things. We would like to point out that we have a number on what that salvage value would be. We think that number is likely an optimistic figure simply because the market for used police equipment is not that big. So there might be some issues in terms of finding a competitive market to be able to sell off those assets. And finally, and we will point this out again before the presentation is over, the severance costs that we've calculated out have not been agreed to by either of the police associations. These are our calculations, they are not theirs, and the associations would obviously reserve the right to do their own calculations and potentially require arbitration to resolve any differences that may come up. Number 4, the severance costs, again, do not include any uniform or special constables that may not be selected by the OPP. We projected costs in years 4 through 10 based on data that we got from the Owen Sound Calls for Service reports from 2013 through 2015. And the reason that we'd like to point this out is that if the City of Owen Sound were to go to the OPP January 1st, 2018, then OPP would collect their own calls for service data in 2018, 19, and 20, and they would apply those calls for service against the provincial formula beginning in 2021. So that would mean that the 2013, 14, and 15 data that we're currently using and projecting forward, all of this is based on the assumption that the calls for service would mirror in 2018, 19, and 20 what they were in 2013, 14, and 15. So recognizing where that data comes from and how those numbers are driven is a pretty important caveat as well. And we do have pension top-up cost estimates as well that we were able to receive through OMERS. and the OPP pension plan. However, recognize that those costs are very dependent on the salaries, the age, and the years of service of those members that actually do transfer off to the OPP at the end of the day. In terms of the dispatching business itself, what we wanted to point out is that there is in order for the Owen Sound Police Service to operate a dispatch service just for itself, there is a sunk cost into doing that. And we estimate that that cost would be about $900,000 a year if the Owen Sound Police Service were simply to run a dispatch service for itself. According to the 2017 budget, the cost of running the current dispatch center looks to be about $1.4 million. In other words, there's a $500,000 difference. So the Owen Sound Police Service is spending about $500,000 more to run its dispatch center than it would be if it were only running a dispatch center for itself. However, we're also able to identify approximately $1.5 million in annual revenue that the service receives coming in as a result of providing that dispatch service to those other municipalities, which means that there's a free flow of revenue of about an extra $1 million a year over and above what would otherwise cost the service to maintain its own dispatch service. In other words, without this business running, we estimate that the annual budget for the Owen Sound Police Service would be approximately $1 million higher each year than it currently is. In terms of the contracts, we did look at a number of the contracts between the Owen Sound Police Service and the other municipalities, the other services for which it provides this dispatch service, and it appears that the contracts call for termination notice that ranges between 18 and 29 months. That means that as of today until June the 30th of 2018, December the 31st, 2019 is the earliest date that we see that the Owen Sound would be able to get out of its current dispatching contracts. I am not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV. We asked administration to seek a legal opinion on the ability of the Owen Sound Police Service or the City of Owen Sound to extricate from these contracts, and it appears that the legal opinion is coincident with our opinion, and there would be some difficulty doing that. That's not to say that it's not impossible, but this cost analysis does not include any potential legal costs associated with terminating those contracts earlier than December the 31st, 2019. I apologize for the size of this, these trying to get 10 years of data pushed into a single form, a single number. What this recognizes is based on the top line, the 2017 police service budget for the Owen Sound Police Service, with a 2.5% inflation factor built in for the succeeding 10 years going out to 2027. And below that you'll see a line that says dispatch, and what we have done for 2019 through 2027 is we have discounted the value of the dispatch service because of the anticipated loss of the contract with Midland, because they will be going to OPP. However, that the loss of that contract is offset by an anticipated reduction of about one full-time equivalent in terms, the equivalent of one full-time position in terms of a reduction in hours available to part-time employees. So there's some offsetting costs there, and we also understand that there are two additional contracts, relatively small but additional contracts that are waiting to be approved pending the outcome of this process. All of that to be said, that over a period of 10 years, we estimate with a 2.5% inflation factor built in, that the cost of policing with under the Owen Sound Police Service would be $84.7 million. Moving on to what would happen with respect to the OPP, there are a number of costs that need to be considered, and we've got them outlined here. And In terms of what those costs actually are, the first year costs, according to the OPP, would work out to $8.3 million. In addition to that, they've proposed that they would require an additional $1.3 million for their initial startup costs. We're estimating that the building renovation costs to meet OPP standards at about $500,000. We did try several times in several fashions to get the OPP to help us with those cost estimates, to work with ourselves and to work with the city. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a number on that, but we do believe that the $500,000 is a reasonable estimate. We've also, by way of calculation, costs that would be required for this city to extricate itself from the Owen Sound Police Service, approximately $2.3 million in severance costs, an additional $444,000 in pension top-up costs. That is a figure that we were able to get from OMERS. There's also the payout of additional sick leave of about $13,000. That money is held in reserve currently. Contract terminations of about $259,000 is the amount that would be required for the Owen Sound Police Service to sever its current service contracts, whether those be for radios, computers, software leases, telecommunications equipment, those types of things. And we've also subtracted from that an estimated salvage value of $601,000 as well, leaving us with a total first-year cost to move from Owen Sound Police Service to the OPP of $12.5 million. In terms of legacy costs, there are 3 that we were able to identify, 2 that we were able to quantify, being retiree benefits and board costs. However, building maintenance costs are already in the city budget and aren't reflected in the OPP or in the Owen Sound Police Service budget, and so we did not attempt to calculate them because the cost of maintaining the building, whether it be occupied by the OPP or the Owen Sound Police Service, should not change other than the renovation costs that are required up front. And what we see here is that the board costs and the cost of retiree benefits for those members of the Owen Sound Police Service who are retired currently, and that the total over a period of 10 years would be just short of $1.5 million. In terms of the 10-year projection, if the City of Owen Sound were to move to the OPP on January 1st, 2018, and again, recognizing that we've said earlier that there's some contractual issues that might not make that possible, we had to start with a base and in order to be able to get the apples-to-apples comparison. So assuming the 2021 start date, the Owen Sound would move from the transition contract, which covers the first 3 years, to what's called the provincial formula. And under the provincial formula, the calculation of the cost of policing for a municipality is based on 3 factors: the base fee, calls for service, and other. And with respect to other, we're looking at things such as court costs, overtime, any contract enhancements that the city may negotiate with the OPP. So the base cost for 2017 to all municipalities that participate with OPP to get their policing is $191.35 per property. We understand that Owen Sound has 11,009 properties, giving us a grand total of $2.1 million. Based on the calls for service data that the Owen Sound Police Service shared with us for 2013, 14, and 15, we fed that into the OPP spreadsheet, and it spit out the number of $3.4 million being the cost of providing services to the municipality based on the calls for service experience in those 3 years. And with respect to the other, we considered the OPP formula as well as the actual costs that are being incurred currently with respect to the courts and the overtime, and we were able to extrapolate out from the OPP data an estimate of $115.17 per household, giving us a total cost of slightly less than $6.8 million based on the 2017 formula. Again, recognizing that this wouldn't come into effect until 2021, we needed a starting point to be able to provide you with a proper comparison. So what that means is that when we add in the cost of the OPP proposals and the provincial formula, recognize that the city would continue to collect revenue on permits that are currently showing up in the Owen Sound Police budget. The city would still get its contribution from the province with respect to the courts. However, it would come out under a slightly different formula. We've estimated that and assumed that the amount of that contribution coming back to the city through the OPP rather than directly through the province would be approximately the same as what it is today. And then adding back in the cost of maintaining a police board and the benefits for those members of the service that are retired, the total cost of policing under the OPP plan comes out to slightly less than $83 million over a 10-year period. The difference between the OPP estimate and the Owen Sound estimate that we've worked out is $1,783,000. When we consider the cost of borrowing the initial $6 million to cover off the difference between the OPP and the Owen Sound Police Service in the first 3 years, the cost of that debt works out to slightly more than $1 million, leaving a net difference to the municipality of a savings of about $728,000. And for those that are interested in the time value of money and applying the net present value, that $728,000 translates to a loss of $271,000 at the over that 10-year period in terms of the value of a dollar today versus 2027. And should the debt not need to be incurred, that $1.78 million looks like $684,000 at the end of a 10-year period. Some final thoughts, issues that we'd like to leave you with respect to those this presentation. The first is with respect to human resources costs, costs of lawsuits, workers' compensation, insurances, police act hearings, and arbitrations can cause spikes in budgets and expenses in smaller organizations. We would like to note that those costs are equally present on a proportional basis in larger organizations, but they tend to be less impactful year over year because there tends to be more of an evening out of frequency of those big cost items that may come up from time to time in a smaller municipality or smaller police service. Also like to note, without trying to put words in the mouths of the association people, that we do believe they reserve the right to disagree with our calculations, and they would require, if the city were to go on to moving forward with the OPP, they would expect to do their own severance calculations, their own pension calculations, and of course, as time progresses, those costs obviously fluctuate a fair bit as well. As we pointed out earlier, this analysis does not include severance costs for any uniform or special constables who are not offered employment with the OPP. We did do a little analysis on this to try to get a sense of what that was so that council would have a sense of the impact. If there was a 10% rejection rate, which is not abnormal, this means that the severance costs would go up by about $500,000. and the pension top-up costs would drop by about 44. So you're looking at, if 10% of the uniformed staff and special constables were not to be offered employment with the OPP, you're looking at a net cost increase of about $455,000 to the municipality. As we noted earlier, again, this analysis does not include any monetization of the costs associated with the early termination of any of the dispatching contracts or the deferral of the OPP decision until 2020. That is our presentation, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
It's a lot of information. Councillor Dodd.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just have two quick questions here. When we go back to the OSPS 10-year projection, you have 2017's annual budget listed as $7,310,295.
What slide are you on there?
Yes, I do apologize. I meant to mention this at the beginning. There was a slight transposition error when we went from Excel to PowerPoint, and I do apologize. The number on the screen is the actual number. There's about a I think it's about a $27,000 difference on what was sent out to you late last week.
Right.
And I do apologize for the confusion.
No, that's perfectly fine. My question with that, though, is that that budget line, is that including the revenues already from the dispatch?
Yes.
Okay, so really our true operating cost annually
Are about $1 million
$1 million higher. So as long as we maintain a similar operating revenue, I guess, bringing in a revenue of approximately an extra $1 million from our dispatch, then our projections, I think this is pretty accurate, right? You're not taking into consideration if we lost any dispatching contracts over the 10-year period.
We didn't. We considered the dispatching business to be stable, and other than those two small contracts, did not consider growth or diminishment of the business either way.
Okay, so just that is already being included. So the true actual operating cost is about $8.3 million. My only other second question was that you had made reference to some operations that Owen Sound Police Services has access to from the OPP. So that was the major crime inspections, K-9 unit, public order unit, and some underwater recovery. Those are current services that we have access to, free of charge.
Yes.
Does the OPP have the authority to take that free of charge away and actually charge local municipality, local services for those services?
It's in the act that they can, through the minister could at some point direct them to charge. They've never have. That's in all their history. I don't think they've ever charged.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Thank you.
Others? Jim?
And thank you, and that's a very thorough presentation, lots of information there. So just specifically before we discuss some of the other things, just following up on that point that Councillor Dodd raised, the K-9 unit, emergency response unit, all of that, you gave a plus to the OPP because Owen Sound would have to go through some sort of level to access those. And so my question is, so what is the level to, if the Owen Sound Police Service wants the K-9 unit, for instance, what's the process? You said it's one less phone call. In my mind, one less phone call doesn't, those are a wash if it's all it is really a phone call.
Right.
So that's my question.
Well, and the fact that the OPP own the K-9 unit, right? There's the two kind of caveats with some of those things. They own the emergency response units, they own the K-9 units, all those things that they own, and the fact one less phone call, it's a minor difference, but I'm sure it tilts whatever value you put on that, it tilts a little bit to the OPP because they own the unit.
Okay. In your presentation, you said the OPP are more able to absorb unbudgeted expenses. So I just want to be clear, the OPP will absorb our unbudgeted expenses? Because that would really tip the balance for me.
No, if you go back to the in the final thoughts, For example, if the Owen Sound Police Service has to go through a formal Police Act hearing, there's a fair amount of expense that the service would have to incur that may not necessarily be budgeted for, and that can cause some spikes in terms of the expense reporting year over year if there is a Police Act charge hearing one year and there isn't the next, and so you can see those fluctuations. The point that I was making is that with an organization the size of the OPP, they have a more regular occurrence of those things. So while there's still, those expenses are still in their budget, they tend to be smoothed out more because they've got a higher level of frequency, although they may not necessarily see in Nottawasaga a Police Act charge any more often than we would see it in the city of Owen Sound. On the whole, they're going to have a pretty regular and steady number that they're going to be dealing with year over year. So what I was trying to say, maybe not as eloquently as I had hoped it was that you don't see the spikes as much.
WSIB might be another example of that.
Just one of many, absolutely.
Okay, and my last sort of question about the information. You've used it, there's a transition contract of 3 years, and then there's a 10-year projection.
Yes.
What's happened in other communities has the transition contract is one thing, the following contract is quite something else.
Yes.
So you have you've factored in that 2.5% inflation rate and those numbers. I guess you've done a number of these analyses for other communities.
Yes.
Correct? So how, I mean, that's the biggest question. How can you project the OPP 10 years out? That's my question.
As accurately as I can predict the OSPS budget 10 years out, and that's why we used a steady factor. Now, looking at the year over year on the OPP, it does look to be in that 2.5% range. I think the OSPS budget actually came in for the draft. I understand for 2018 looks to be somewhat less than that. But by and large, the reason we applied 2.5% is it's a pretty close facsimile to what we've seen as an inflation rate over the last decade or so, and there's no reason to suspect that that's necessarily going to change. But if it does, then we would expect it to change equally for both organizations, and primarily in the world of policing. You're looking at 85 to 90% of your costs are related to the bodies that perform the services for you. So it's really related to the human resources side, and there's marginal differences in the levels of compensation amongst police officers in the province of Ontario. So that's where our comfort level came from. But in terms of the value of the projections 10 years out, a terrorist attack, a major event, a murder, a major car accident through the middle of town, all of those kinds of things have the ability to change those projections at any point in time for either police service.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Kepke?
Thank you, Worship. Just a question on slide 27, where you're talking about the uniform patrols. You're saying that the OPP model would be 1 sergeant and 6 constables assigned to general patrol duty for each of the 4 platoons. Is this exclusively to Owen Sound, or are these OPP officers available to other municipalities in the area as well?
The OPP would be better to answer that probably, but
based on your analysis.
Well, they will say and have said in their thing that you will get, if they quote 35 officers, they will show that you got the equivalent of 35 FTEs over the year. So by the end of the year, they actually do finances. They'll come out and say, we fulfilled it. We fulfilled all the hours, so many hours for each of them, and we did 35. If it's less, generally they don't charge you if they don't give you that. Now, their intent would be to have available, I believe, the extra officer in Owen Sound, but they do have a caveat that says, that they could be taken anywhere, in the county especially. Sometimes beyond the county, if there's a a crisis somewhere. But they do financial, smoothing out of what you, to make sure you get your value. But in the same token, if God forbid, there was a disaster here, they would haul in people from outside. So all I can say is that their intent would be to provide 6 officers on a shift in Owen Sound. But the operational needs would take precedence, and they could be somewhere else for a short period or a long period. But Owen Sound board and council would only pay for, in the end, I think, for what the hours they've produced for them.
But they actually don't have the same number of boots on the ground in Owen Sound all the time as the Owen Sound Police Service would.
I'm sorry, say that. I'm sorry.
They actually would not have the same number of boots on the ground in Owen Sound as they would compared.
Yeah, I can't really predict that. I can only say that they bid for more officers, and I really can't predict that.
Okay, my other question is on taxi licensing. Right now, the Owen Sound Police Services does taxi license. OPP will not do that. Would this be an additional cost to the city of Owen Sound to have somebody do taxi licensing, the inspections, the monitoring, all that's required?
Probably easier for someone on staff to answer than you.
Yeah, staff.
Wayne, Kate?
If I could, Your Worship, I believe we would look at having it done through the clerk's office.
With the same number of people that we have in the clerk's office?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's see, other services that OPP would be willing to provide. They've noted that they would be willing to provide other services. Will there be additional costs for those other services?
Yes.
So they're
Generally,
not
that's a yes.
calculated
Yeah,
in this?
yeah. My experience with just the OPP is they like a lot of all the major services, even the big ones I was on. We try to get out of doing bylaw enforcement and have the city do bylaws and things like that. Generally, the same as they didn't want to do the taxi stuff. They will do. I've seen contracts where they will do bylaw enforcement if you insist on it, but there would be a fee for that. But they don't as a principle. They'd rather put their time and effort into doing what they consider more serious stuff.
So the only disappointment I have in all this information we received is it looks like Owen Sound Police Services cost $1 million more to operate than OPP over our 10-year period, or whatever. Maybe we need to look at what services Owen Sound Police Services are providing and reduce some of those, I don't know, to keep things as they were. But anyways, that's a disappointment to me.
Okay. Others? Deputy Mayor Wright is next.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for doing all this work for us so that we can have a comparison. It's been, I've served on the county for a number of years and talked to other municipalities over those years when they become a little disgruntled with their OPP bill that they get at the end of a contract. And I'm assuming that, well, I'm sure you're aware of it, but this seems to be for services that OPP have provided to that municipality over the course of the contract that perhaps was not contracted for, that was deemed to be extra services that they've been given a bill. Are you familiar with any of that?
I believe that when I heard those complaints and the stories of that happening, that was during the transition period from the old billing model. As you recall, the OPP went into a moratorium on offering service quotes or bids or proposals for a period of time. And while they were doing that, they were transitioning to this current model. And as we understand it, because of the transition to this new model, there was a smoothing out of the costs that were being charged to different municipalities for policing, and some were being charged a smaller amount on a proportionate basis, and their bills went up and caused quite a bit of angst at the municipal level, and other municipalities actually saw their bills decrease. And under the new provincial formula, what you see as you drill into it is that there is a very transparent cost allocation model that's brought into it. So I haven't heard of anything recently in terms of those issues and concerns. It seemed to be more about the transition from the old billing model, which was less transparent and a little bit more, a little bit less mathematical, to this new one, and some of those transitions caused some bumps in their relationships.
Okay, and then another question. Have you built into your 10-year program any costs that the provincial government, I mean, they do all the negotiations, and salaries and benefits are all negotiated by the province for the OPP. What have you put into the 10 years for negotiations?
2.5%
Overall.
2.5% overall. That includes increases in wages, which we're seeing frankly, over the last number of years, we're seeing that the increases for the police and fire have been coming down. However, costs of healthcare benefits continue to escalate at a rate that's much higher than inflation, and because 85 to 90% of costs, whether it's Owen Sound Police Service or the OPP, typically are related to the human resources costs. That's why we thought the 2.5%, while a little bit higher than CPI, did make sense.
Okay, and your staffing model, I noticed that you've just got a sergeant in there. There is a commander, I believe.
Yes.
A district commander or an area commander that would be overall responsible for OPP, Owen Sound Detachment?
There you go.
Yes, the OPP or bid that they put in has the inspector, divisional inspector. It's actually, we've got 0.5 on there because, like I said at the start of that slide, we've counted a half FTE for part-time, so the inspector would only be part-time to Owen Sound. But he's like 0.4, it's close to 0.4 actually, in dollars of his salary that is part of the OPP contract. But I do believe they put a staff sergeant actually in Owen Sound, and the detachment commander, the inspector, would go between the two, between the OPP station and Owen Sound as needed. And
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Gregg next.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation tonight. I spent some time lately going over particularly Orangeville and Midland in the last year, and I thought your presentation's been excellent. But I just want to touch upon a couple items that have already been mentioned. I'm going to start with one here, which is a comparison between Kenora, Leamington, and Pembroke. And the municipal police budget prior to the OPP in Kenora in 2008, when they transitioned, was $6.8 million. In 2015, the OPP billing model cost was $5.5 million. The net difference was $1.3 million. Leamington transitioned in 2009. Their municipal budget prior to transition was $6.989, and in 2015 was $4.6. Net difference of $2.39 million. Pembroke transitioned in year 2012, starting at $5.5 million budget. In 2015 was $4.2 million, net difference of $1.3 million. My question is, those all look good, but are you aware of any transitioning over, that similar 7-8 year period now where you have not seen those savings occur? Tough spot, a tough question, but I know that this is your business, so I'm wondering, in your experience, are you aware of me?
A couple of caveats on that. First, to answer your specific question, the one that comes to mind is down my neck of the woods, would be the town of Essex. They experienced a bit of a spike when the provincial formula was invoked, and I don't recall exactly what the implications were and how that compared to their prior, when they had a municipal service, what that budget looked like. But that's one that does come to the top of my mind right away. And I think that leads to the second point, is that each of those examples that you cited were transitions that happened prior to the adoption of the new pricing model that the OPP has adopted, which is much more transparent than what was being adopted by or proposed by the OPP prior to 2014.
Next question. I'm going to refer, it's the City of Orangeville, after a follow-up report from their treasurer, had BDO just do basically a peer review. They did question why there was not a higher increase, and if I can just make you a little more aware, their comments were, we commented to test the assumption utilized, town staff could have also considered the percentage increase of total OPP province-wide costs, which we have calculated to be 3.7% for the most recent year, which what I would assume 2016, perhaps 15, and the anticipated increase in employee compensation, which are part of the total OPP province-wide costs, which we understood to be 1.9 in 2017 and 1.75 in 2018. So 2.5 could look a little bit low. I'm just wondering why, again, in reference to that, are you falling back on 2.5?
Combination of factors. One is CPI, which is hovering in the range of about 2%. We're seeing police contracts, monetary financial settlements coming out in the range of about 2%. However, the costs of insurances and healthcare benefits, in particular healthcare benefits, inflation rates there are still hovering much higher than the rate of inflation. We're still seeing 6, 7, 8% in some organizations, again, depending on critical incidents, utilization rates, those kinds of things, but generally. And so what we tried to do was err on the side of caution and look at it and said 2.5% seems to be a reasonable figure going forward, but if we're wrong, then and likely we are, it'll be somewhat of a different number, so we're trying to average that over a 10-year period, then we're wrong for both of them. And so that's why we insisted that we apply the same inflationary factor across the board.
I've got a few questions. Next question is on the, I would assume we have a current asset value on our dispatch equipment, and at some point it needs replacing or updating or reinvestment. I'm not sure, do we have a reserve fund within our current police budget where those funds are allocated, or basically we're depreciating every year? If not, is there any consideration what kind of capital costs might be required in 3 or 4 years within our own dispatch equipment to be able to keep it current and...
I'm going to be a little bit nervous about guessing on this. I do believe that the radio system was updated recently. Am I okay on that one? And as we understand from the contracts, whenever a new municipality or new service comes on board and adopts the Owen Sound Police dispatching service, they are paying for any of their own equipment, anything that they require on their end. So the costs associated with the Owen Sound Police dispatch are only those costs associated with dispatching for Owen Sound, not for those other municipalities. Did I answer your question?
Okay, helpful. Yep, appreciate it. The fire department dispatching, which we do, is that cost entered into the numbers here?
Yes,
That's
it is.
part of the 900,000?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. For now, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Lyman?
Well, a number of questions. I've been in a lot of OPP stations over the years, not as a prisoner. This is not, this is as when I was a reporter. And example, the Owen Sound OPP station that was here, it had virtually nothing in it. compared to what is in the Owen Sound Police Station. Why do we have $500,000 in renovations? And for what?
Oh, for the OPP?
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought maybe you were asking me about something that happened before.
No.
Well,
That's not under
the
bridge.
Owen Sound, the OPP have certain standards that they require of any building that they occupy. Some of those are accessibility issues, some of them are safety and security issues. The most pertinent example is that we identified in the somewhat limited information we received from the OPP was with respect to bringing the cells up to the standards that the OPP requires. There are 16 cells. We estimated those costs to be in the neighborhood of $20,000 per cell, resulting in a cost of about $300,000 to $325,000 just to renovate the cells to OPP standards. That doesn't include rewiring cabling for telecommunications that they wanted, moving or erection of walls, and safety glass as well. So there were a number of other issues that we identified that had potential costs that got up over that $320,000, and that's why we were comfortable with the $500,000, but we really can't give you anything more well-defined than that.
Okay, that's question one. Question two, you believe that you need 5 more officers, I believe the number is, constables the city currently has for OPP. Why that variance?
I'm not sure I want to catch that hand grenade.
That was the OPP proposal. It
Yeah.
wasn't their suggestion.
Oh,
just to be clear.
okay.
That's outside of
Yeah.
the scope of our assignment.
Okay, that's sort of a puzzlement to me. The other thing is you did an apples to apples report, and that's great. But we also need an apples to oranges report. Because we have to, the citizens of Owen Sound can't afford for police costs to continue to rise. And if you look at the projection, by the end of it, it'll be $10 million a year for city police. We can't afford it. Wages in Owen Sound are approximately 20% below the provincial average. We have to find a way to get some oranges into the mix, or lemons, whatever.
So is that are you bringing it to a question, Councillor Lemon?
My question is, did you look at any ways of achieving cost savings?
No, sorry, Councillor, that wasn't part of what we were asked to look at. We took the numbers that we were given in the budget of the Owen Sound Police Service, found out what the services were that those budget numbers were supporting, but we did not go in and analyze any levels of efficiency or inefficiency that may exist.
So all right, that answers my question. It's just very frustrating because people are hurting with tax increases.
We're going to keep moving here, Peter. Thank you. I have Councillor Thomas next.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for your presentation. It was good. It's a lot to take in a short space of time. So excuse me if you've answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Looking beyond the initial 3 years, which we expected to be expensive in any case, the startup years, and looking at your charts on page 49 and 56, the 10-year projections, comparing the two, it seems as though the OPP, starting in 2021, is going to be about $1 million a year less to operate the service in this community. And I just wondered if you could tell me where the cost saving is there. What is the difference? I don't know if did I make sense on that one?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I understand the question.
It's $1 million a year less for from 2021 on, and I'm just wondering where the difference in cost is.
That is a result of the application of the provincial formula, along with those other takeaways and add-ons that I had described. And that provincial formula, again, being driven by the cost specific to the municipality, by the base, which is currently at $191.35 per property, and then the key driver being the calls for service. And we applied calls for service data from 2013 through 15. We did have access to 2016 data. However, we felt that it was important to use the same 3 years that the OPP used to establish their transition period, the pricing for the first 3 years. So that's why, that's how that number was achieved. The first 3 years, their charges seem to be somewhat higher than they would be in those transition years. So there's a real drop-off in year 4. But my caution on that is that drop-off in year 4 is nothing more than a projection based on that formula. So if there are, the upswing cost potentials are much greater than the potential for those costs to go down. So even if, the primary driver that would drive the costs down on the calls for service piece would be fewer calls for service. However, that would be offset by the fact that costs over that 3-year period would be increasing. So there would be some mitigation of the reduction, if I could say it that way. On the other hand, if there's a spike or an increase in the calls for service, that gets then extrapolated on top of those ongoing cost increases as well. So the upside of it is much higher. And so my caveat attached to that would be, don't expect that number to be a lot lower, but it could be a lot higher. How's that? Did I
Thank
answer
you.
it?
Yeah, good.
It'd make you feel better, though.
Yeah. Are we going to have statements later, Your Worship, or you want me to continue?
I assume so. I still have questions from Councillor McManaman.
No, sorry, Your Worship, I was ready for the statements portion of the meeting.
Oh, okay.
I'm done with my
So we're done with questions for presentations. Mr. Levac, Mr. Hollingworth, thank you so much for coming in and helping us with this. You know, when we first got the OPP thing, there's a lot of people in the community saying, oh, it's a slam dunk, it's really obvious, isn't it? And it sure wasn't obvious for us. So you can probably tell by the questions, and anyone that's watching probably got a lot of information from you as well. We have decisions to make at tonight or at some point, and we certainly appreciate what you've done and helped us get through this information and understand it. So thank you for your presentation and helping us along the way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Councillor McManaman?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think it's important if we, with all this information now, to step back. How did we get here in the first place? How did this all start? And I think where it started early in the term of this council, we committed to do a service review of all services done in the city. Obviously, one of the larger budget items is the police service. There was no intent, there was no, I know there's been lots of people that think there was, but there was no insinuation that the police service was doing a bad job. It was that we needed to review every single service we did and see if there was an alternative, a less expensive way. In some cases, there were improvements in different services. We looked at every service we do, public works, parks, on and on, every service. The only way to do it through the police, with the police service, was get a costing from the OPP. So this has been a very valuable initiative to just see where we're at. Where do the costs of the Owen Sound Police budget compare with a similar service? So that's how we got here. At the time, the Police Services Board had suggested that another way to do it was have a service review, appoint members of council, members of the police board work together to do that, to go through this, do a service review of the Owen Sound Police Services. When you look at the numbers that were just presented by our consultants, clearly financially, with a 10-year projection, and we all know 10 years is an awful long time to making projections, in my mind, the numbers aren't there to move to OPP. There'd have to be a significant case financial case to be made to go there, and it doesn't appear to be. But what does appear to me is the question Councillor Thomas got to, was from 2021 on, the OPP does appear to be offering a less expensive service moving forward. And I'm wondering if it isn't valuable to go back to the Police Services Board with this information and ask them to do a service review based on the numbers. We've got a formula here. We've got a template, if you will, to review the budget with an eye to this template that's presented to us, has been presented to us tonight. So when the Police Services Board asked us initially to do a service review, council put that on hold to wait the outcome of this. Now we have this. I'd be interested to hear what other people think, but I suggest perhaps we should go back to the Police Services Board with this template and say, are there savings here? Are there different ways to do the service based on what we have here? So those are my comments. I'm interested to hear what others think.
Go back to Councillor Thomas, because I cut him off.
That's okay. I think Councillor McManaman has maybe been cribbing my notes somehow over the internet or something. I think that's what it comes down to. Councillor Lemon started us off, and, I hate to say everything's about dollars and cents, but in some cases, we do have to find ways as a municipality to operate all of our departments more efficiently. And I would really like to see this go back now to the Police Services Board. In fact, I'd like to address both our members on council here, the mayor and Councillor O'Leary, and say, let's move this forward to the board and see if you can't come up with a plan to, over the long term, try and reduce some costs and bring it more in line with what we can afford as a municipality.
Our next police board meeting is December 20th, which is a Wednesday. Our next council meeting is the 18th. I wouldn't want to put words into anyone's mouth, but I wonder if Mr. Pierce is even sitting out there thinking that maybe we could have another meeting sooner to have a discussion. Oh, he seems to be nodding his head, so I guess he was thinking that. So I wonder if we can, we'll maybe try and get together the police board before we come back on the 18th and get some kind of response so we can, yeah. Others? Go ahead.
That probably requires a motion, doesn't it? That's what I was going to suggest.
I would think we should have a motion because...
Ms. Bloomfield is smiling and nodding pretty strenuously there.
What did you put it on? These?
Go ahead.
I'd move that we ask the Owen Sound Police Board to meet to consider this presentation that's been made tonight, and to consider conducting a service review based on the presentations by the consultants. And I'm looking to others for help with that motion if that's not adequate. And just to be clear, Your Worship, I don't think anybody should expect the police service are going to meet before December 18th and come back with $1 million savings. There needs to be some timelines in here. I think what we're looking for at this point, at least that's what I'm looking at, would be a commitment from the Police Services Board to conduct a service review within the next reasonable period of time, and maybe I'll leave that to them to answer. Is it reasonable to do it in 3 months? I don't know. I'm not sure, but I'd like to hear from them about what the timeline might be for that service review.
Thank you. So, Brian, you've got wording? Okay, Councillor O'Leary, I think your hand went up.
I was just going to say we probably shouldn't put a time limit on it in terms of whatever the business plan is. I just know that I think the word that Councillor McManaman was looking for too is benchmark. We're looking for a benchmark here. And now we have it, and that was my only question or problem I had in all of this, is that in 2021, that we're $1 million different, and to me, that's a problem. So I'd go along with the motion. I think we have an awful lot of work to do moving forward, and hopefully the chief and the board can work together and come up with a business plan over the next 3 years, or try and target 2021 or whatever that can bring us in line with the OPP. You know, I think when you look at the comparisons, I did comparisons in addition to what Joe came up with, and it's just, they're two really good services. You'd have to look a long time to find someone that is upset with our Owen Sound Police Force, unless you ran into someone that got a speeding ticket this afternoon.
Did you get one? For
For the most part, we have a really, really good service, and, you know, no one wants to make that change, but $1 million is $1 million, and we have to work towards straightening that out. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to call the question. Let's go with still comments. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Lemon. Keep it brief.
Yeah, I really feel that this is a positive move for everyone. I've learned more about where we are on policing tonight, and I think it's wonderful, and I would suggest that perhaps some council involvement or city involvement in this process so we can all work together. The other thing I would like it to look at are there functions that are performed now by uniformed officers which could be performed by not as expensive people. We'll leave it at that. In other words, there was reference to bylaw enforcement being done by the police. You don't need a policeman to do bylaw enforcement, but there may be other things that could be done.
Okay.
And I think that should be considered in this process, not outsourcing it, just finding the most efficient way to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Gregg.
Thank you. I would, yeah, I'd like to see more information come back from the police board. You know, one question I have right now, we've heard tonight, is $500,000 approximate guess at modifications needed to the police building. But I'd like to know, I have a question, is that something that ultimately is being provincially driven, and the OPP are first to be implementing these changes? And are these changes going to be something that our police detachment is going to have to implement anyway in 2 or 3 years? Tonight, we were just provided the information that that's what the OPP has. So I would have further questions, and I know when we see minutes later tonight, we're seeing the addition of civilian staff. We're seeing the addition of part-time constable into our police department in 2018, and we've just been provided information here tonight that there's an OPP model that puts more boots on the ground for less dollars. So there's probably more to those hirings than what maybe meets the eye here. They could be retirees and so forth. So, yeah, I have some more information. I'd be more questions, and I would be keenly awaiting the information back from police board as to what they can do moving forward to bring that line item down.
Thank you, Councillor Kepke. Last word, and then we'll call the question.
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly agree with Councillor O'Leary's comments and the Owen Sound Police Services and their operations in Owen Sound, and I'm very happy with those. Again, as I mentioned before, disappointed in the dollar difference. I'm certainly supporting the motion that a service analysis take place, because I think some of these differences can be achieved possibly. But I do want to voice that I do support the Owen Sound Police.
Good, thank you.
I know you're going to call.
Okay, go ahead.
I know, but I think we have to remember the dollar difference. There's services that our city is providing that were not included in that OPP costing. I think we just have to remember that.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Good. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, gentlemen, for attending. Thanks, chief and officers, and the board for attending. Next, yep. Yeah, this might be a good time to escape if you're thinking about escaping.
Those are things that are not exactly. Those are actual things like that.
There was a line item in the agenda for public questions.
It's coming up yet. We're not done. There we go. Okay, so next on our agenda is number 9, which is public question period. If there's anyone that wishes to ask council a question, now is the perfect time to do it. Oh. Okay, apparently, if you want to just hold on a second, apparently we've got to wait for Mr. Ritchie to come back in. He was out. Thank you, Roger. Just while we're waiting, I think we can thank the police officers, men and women, and the dispatch and all the other people that are watching at the police station on Rogers Cable as well for participating and tuning in. What did I just do with my pen?
Glad Brianna understood it. Not sure I did.
Did you guys understand it?
Yeah.
Okay.
They said they don't have any. Nobody comes in.
So why not just keep it?
Okay, there we go. So now we'll kick back in at number 9 is public question period, and I see Linda here from the Tom Thompson Art Gallery Board. Welcome. Yep.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Body and councillors and city staff. We received the report that the city manager is bringing forward tonight, and I do have a question for you. And it's around funding, and our funding from specifically Canada Council and Ontario Council. So the question is council confident that appropriate meetings have been held and sufficient research completed to ensure that funding from the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council of Arts, and possibly other agencies as well will not be affected by the proposed changes?
Thank you. So, Mr. Ritchie, have you done that research? You're going to be able to satisfy council's curiosity or concern on that when we get to the report?
Certainly, Your Worship, Ms. Allen and I, Ms. Allen more than myself, has spent time talking to the various funding agencies. And moving ahead, we will certainly confirm with them that any changes to the management of the Tom Thompson Art Gallery does not affect our ability to apply for those grants. I have to be honest, Your Worship, most of our time has been spent trying to arrive at a figure for the public ultimately of what the deficit has been for 2017. I will tell you, I'm more concerned with how we prepare a budget for 2018 that is probably going to have to recoup for the City of Owen Sound something in the neighborhood of $500,000. So that has been very much where we have been spending our time, but moving ahead, we will ensure that the city does not face that kind of a deficit again from the Tom Thompson Art Gallery.
Thank you. And Linda, I can tell you that this council, it came up at budget the other day, this council has the best interest of the art gallery in mind. We recognize it as being a cultural institute and very important in our community. It's a big, big, big tourism draw that's recognized. We're going to do everything we can to get it back in firm footing, move it forward, get it independent again, and get it back moving forward.
Good, thank you, and we certainly share your concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Number 10 is correspondence, and we have no correspondence that we need to consider. Number 11 is reports, and here we are from Mr. Ritchie with regard to the Art Gallery Board.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Tonight's report is on the Tom Thompson Art Gallery Board, and the recommendation is that in consideration of Staff Report CM 17017, respecting the Tom Thompson Art Gallery Board, City Council first directs staff to bring forward a bylaw to dissolve the Tom Thompson Art Gallery Board of Management effective January 31st, 2018. Secondly, direct staff to repeal bylaw number 1999-013. And thirdly, direct staff to bring forward a bylaw to establish a Tom Thompson Art Gallery Advisory Committee consisting of 3 members of council and 4 members of the general public appointed by council to serve for staggered 3-year terms. I'd like to say, Your Worship, the Tom Thompson Art Gallery is a treasure to this community. The collection and our staff at the gallery provide a cultural resource to city residents that we are all proud of. It is a tourist attraction, and when I have welcomed new residents to the city, they often mention the Tom as one of the decision makers in choosing to live in Owen Sound. I have recommended, and council has approved, that management reporting for the gallery will be through the city manager's office. This will provide financial and business stability for the gallery. However, the acting director and staff need to have input, advice, and support from an artistic and curatorial perspective that I readily admit I cannot offer. The approval of the recommendations in this evening's report will allow for this to be provided with the establishment of a Tom Thompson Art Gallery Advisory Committee. The advisory committee would provide advice, suggestions, and input on how to operate the gallery in the coming months and years. Minutes from the advisory committee meetings would come to council for final approval. I encourage anyone who has an interest, or better yet, a love of the arts, to put your application forward to become a member of the Tom Thompson Art Gallery Advisory Committee. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Dodd?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have a quick question through you to the city manager. I know we had discussed this at, actually it might even be appropriate for Councillor Thomas to make that comment. As we had discussed through budget, we had made the notion that some of that deficit needs to be recouped back through our overall just operating costs. So just for clarification, that's not totally going to take away from the program funding or some of the potential that they could still run some certain programs. That's more or less on our internal operating side. Is that correct?
If I could, Your Worship, and I'll certainly try our best. Miss Allen and I have been working with the staff at the gallery to make sure that the gallery continues to be a vital cultural resource to the community. We are doing our best to take a budget that provides the doors to be open, programming to be done very similar to what would have been run in 2014 and 15 and up to that time. Working with the staff there and with the community, I'm sure we can continue to do programming outside of that. But it will be, I don't want to understate it, it will be a challenge to keep that community, that cultural icon moving forward in future years. But we will do our absolute best to do that, and I'm sure with this community and the people that will apply for this board, we will be able to do that. So I'm certain we can make it happen, Councillor.
Others? Councillor Lemon?
Just a question. Repealing bylaw 199-013. What exactly is that? Is that the bylaw that authorizes the management board?
That's correct.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Others? Councillor Thomas?
Just follow up a little further on Travis's, Councillor Dodd's comment that we are in fact just talking here about the operational cost of the gallery. There are all sorts of grants available out there in the world for programming, and I would anticipate that the gallery will continue to access those grants where they can to provide excellent programming to the community.
I think somebody needs to move the recommendation, but before we get there, it's my understanding that you have to have at least one person who is an artist on that committee to be able to qualify for a lot of the funding, and I wonder if we should be amending this number 3 right on its face to add that requirement, one of the 4. Make sure that it's in there as a condition. Councillor Dodd?
Councilor Thomas, you are more than welcome to do this one. I would make that recommendation. That is true, that there is additional funding and sources that are available when we do have an artist on the board. So I would make that, that modification to the recommendation and move forward with those 3 recommendations.
That's okay, Brianna? Got it? Okay, so you've got the motion on the floor. Any other discussion, questions? Call the question, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Thank you. Number 11A2 is report from Ms. Bloomfield with regard to fees and charges review.
Yes, through your worship, the fees and charges bylaw contains all current fees in a single place, accessible to council, staff, and the public. Council reviews fees annually or when reviewing a particular service. Attachment 1 of the report lists the recommended fee changes, which includes the rationale and research behind the changes. The draft bylaw is also attached to the report. Should council have any questions about a particular fee, the respective director will be happy to answer any questions you may have. The recommendation listed for approval is for council to direct staff to prepare for a public meeting respecting changes to fees in the building department and bring forward the 2018 fees and charges bylaw for consideration by council.
Thank you. Discussion, questions? Go ahead.
Under your fees and charges bylaw, there's one that I disagree with, that, and that is...
Keep your voice up so they hear you there.
That is the, let me see, the second one, it's notarizing. How many would you do?
We haven't done any in a couple of years, and, maybe 2 or 3 a year, if that, if we did get any.
Yeah, so I guess my concern is that there are people that don't know where to go, and the place that they do go is to City Hall. So if you don't do it, who would you send it to?
There are several lawyers in the city that we would direct them to. Most lawyers in the city are able to do this function.
So you direct them to a law office?
Yes, we do, yeah.
And the fee would be, I'm just guessing, but I think the fee would be a lot more than that, like probably twice as much.
Yeah, so why wouldn't we just do it if we only get 2 or 3 a year?
At this time, we don't have the staff capabilities of doing this job.
Well, you don't have anyone capable of doing it?
No.
But you do still do commissioners?
Yes, we do.
Okay, all right, well, that's fine. Thank you for explaining that.
Okay. Councilor Gregg?
Thank you. I have also one question and one particular problem with some of the charge increases. There's a mention that regarding soccer, we have A fields and D fields. Is that just a spelling error and it meant to say A and B, or is B and C missing? And while you're searching that, I know personally I've been speaking with individuals who use the Class A diamond, and Duncan Major is a great example, and their feedback is, yeah, if you're going to invest and do the work that we are planning on doing in 2018 in the ball diamond, they don't think the increase is unreasonable, and you can spread it out through your league and through your team justly. We don't have minor softball in Owen Sound right now. We've got very few users of some of those Class B and C diamonds, and where I absolutely disagree is I can see it being comparable to Saugeen Shores or Hanover or West Grey for our Class A's, but I'd like to see the comparables when we're looking at rate increases for Class B and C ball diamonds. Those aren't the towns that we're in competition with. It's Shallow Lake, it's Hepworth, it's Tara, it's Holland Center, Chatsworth. Like, those are comparable Class B, C diamonds. So I can support the increase in the Class A fields, but considering the low take-up of some of our Class C and B diamonds right now, I don't support increasing the fees for, nobody's using them, or few are using them for the fees that we have now, so I'm not in support of that fulsome change for Class B and C ball fields.
Staff wish to respond?
Through your worship, if I understand the question on soccer, it's about, there's Class A fields, and then the bylaw schedule skips to Class D fields. And Class A fields would be those at the soccer complex at Kiwanis. The D fields would be at Kelso Beach and I think Victoria Park. So that's the difference in the fields. I don't think we're missing B and C. There just aren't any.
Okay.
Anyone else?
I have another question.
Yep, please.
Just a question about the campgrounds. We have a new one there, off-season campgrounds, unserviced, no amenities, $25 per night. So how are they, in the wintertime, those roads aren't plowed. So how do they get in and who do they pay? Or who knows they're in there?
Through you, your worship, we do have requests from time to time. For example, the Winter Scouts is one example where we have people in there. But we do have people after the campground closes, late in the fall, after Thanksgiving, this time of year. We wouldn't offer them any services with washrooms, et cetera, other than what would be at the public washrooms at the inn. But if they wanted to come with their tent and camp there or trailer, we are proposing an off-season fee.
I don't know who they'd pay. Who's going to know they're in there?
They would pay the staff who are down at the parks works building in the park.
Works building, oh, okay.
Anyone else?
That's it.
I think we need a motion of some sort. Councillor Gregg?
Well, if there's no other comments or questions, I'd make a motion to approve the fees and charges bylaw, but with the exception that Class B and C ball diamond fees remain the same as the existing fee. Just that one small change.
Okay, so that's a motion made. Discussion, Councillor McManaman.
And thank you, Your Worship. And I'm just wondering, a friendly amendment to that, because I think I heard you say, and I would agree with you, that Class A fields, you're fine with that change. The B and C, would it be appropriate to ask the Parks and Rec Committee to investigate, or get a report back to investigate that further? Because when we reviewed these years ago, all ball diamond rates were far too low, and they were raised at the time, and then they were kind of left at that, and now this is another one to try and get us back to some sort of cost recovery. So I just think we need maybe to get some more information, particularly on B and C. Like, I don't even know what a B and C field is, for instance, and why are they B and C as opposed to A or D? You know, I don't know. So would it be a friendly amendment to just ask specifically for more information back to committee on the B and C field rates and maybe some comparators like you'd mentioned, and just more information how those how that fee's arrived at in the first place and how it compares to others. Anyway, that was a very long, friendly amendment to just ask for B and Cs, could we get a report back committee on those fees?
So it'd be approving the recommendation, save and accept baseball fields B and C to be sent to committee for review. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if that can be done, save and accept those two.
Okay. Any other discussion? Councillor Kepke?
Just a question, did you not mention soccer as well to find out what a C and D or B and C field is?
We
No,
don't
but
have
just
any.
to find out what they are.
Or
do we know
I think
that?
somebody will know.
An A field is a sprinkler one and a D one is not, and there are no B and Cs. It just different levels.
Just because. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? And that's carried. Thanks. Next, I think, is Ms. Coulter with regard to the chip wagon.
Thank you, Worship. The chip wagon has operated for over 50 years in our downtown, and in 2012 there was an RFP issued, and at that time Council had approved a 3-year agreement, a lease agreement for the space with a one right of renewal for 2 years. In 2016, council had approved assigning the lease from Paul and Nancy Vermillier to Mr. Hussein. And at that time, it was clear that an extension was not contemplated. The lease rate in 2017 is just over $6,000. Since that time, it's become clear that the timing to implement the Downtown River Precinct has changed somewhat, with design being contemplated in 2018, with construction in 2019. The current lessee is interested in a one-year extension. When we spoke to the city solicitor about this, he suggested we allow the current lease to expire, and you'll see in the one paragraph there's a typo. It should say in December, that it would end, or it currently ends in December 2017. And the solicitor has recommended that we do the extension through a mobile food business license. So that's the attached draft agreement that's been provided to council. It still deals with things like the lease rate, which would be similar to last year or 2017 with the OCPI, insurance, timing, utilities, taxes. So the recommendation, Your Worship, is that, considering the report and the request for Mr. Hussein, which is attached, that you would grant permission to operate a mobile food business for a term of January 1, 2018 to December 31, 2018, and that council would request staff bring forward a bylaw to have the mayor and clerk execute that agreement.
There we go. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would move that recommendation. This is a business that still is operational, bringing in taxes into the community, and considering that we're not moving forward with the River Precinct plan as of yet, it is coming in the future, but not right now. I think we should be moving forward to executing this agreement.
Continue to work with them. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Next, we have a report from Ms. Allen, I think, on 2018 interim tax levy.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is an annual bylaw that we look for levying interim taxes. Our total taxes will not be determined until the final tax levy based on our budget and the tax policy that we set. However, we would like to levy the interim taxes based on 50% of last year's tax bill, and that's consistent with previous years. And this would generate approximately $14 million in taxes for the first half of the year.
Thank you. Councillor Kepke?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be happy to move that recommendation.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried.
County report.
We're going to put that in another business because they missed it. You saw the email. Okay. Consent agenda, 11B.
Yes, through your worship, on the consent agenda this evening is a report from the facilities booking coordinator respecting the Summertime Blues Festival, minutes for receipt from the Tom Thompson Art Gallery Board, Owen Sound Municipal Nonprofit Housing Corporation, Owen Sound Housing Company, and Police Services Board. Cuddly Buddies, located at Heritage Place Mall, received its business license, and there's correspondence received which is presented for the information of council. A full listing is available at 11B7.
Good, thank you. Councillor Gregg?
Moved by myself, Councillor Gregg, that City Council receives items 11B1 to 11B7 on the consent agenda dated December 4th, 2017, and that the recommendations contained in report 11B1 be approved.
All in favor? That is carried. Councillor Lemon's come back. I'll jump down. There's Owen Sound Municipal Nonprofit Housing and the Housing Company. Anything to report from the minutes?
Yes, Your Worship, things are moving ahead. There's been a couple glitches in the development, as there normally are, but things are moving ahead, and they expect to have the 28 units roughed in terms of exterior before the snow flies.
Good, thank you. Councillor O'Leary, anything to report in the Police Board?
Thank you, Worship. The Police Board have selected 2 applicants for a vacant provincial appointment seat. We're still waiting to hear that selection to be made. Chief Zornberger informed the board that the budget continues to remain on track. As a result of a previous discussion regarding foot patrol in the downtown core, and if there is a need for additional hours, Chief Zornberger provided a PowerPoint presentation titled The Downtown Core Study. This was a 3-year, 9-month analysis of calls/occurrences for service. The main message through the presentation was our downtown is safe, and work needs to be done to change the community's perception of the downtown core not being safe. As well, we had Inspector Jeff Flooney made the same presentation at the last DIA board meeting, which was good as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas, we're in the consent agenda. Is there anything that you want to advise council of from the Tom Thompson Art Gallery Board that we haven't?
No, in view of the fact those minutes are from October, Your Worship, I think a lot's happened in the meantime, and I have nothing further to add.
Good, thank you. So we're down to 11C then, minutes of boards and committees for approval, and the first one is Accessibility Advisory Committee from November 27th. Anybody? Either of you? Go ahead.
Sure. Your Worship, this meeting we discussed, the committee discussed the dynamic symbol for access that came to council, I guess it was last meeting. That's the blue accessibility symbol that's used around the country, around the world, I think, and this one was MPP Bill Walker's suggestion to the city that we support the dynamic symbol of access, which is a more, what would you say, more active-looking symbol. Anyway, the committee endorsed that suggestion and sends it back to us, so I suppose if council endorses these minutes, they would also agree with the new symbol to be considered. Of course, there are lots of things to discuss as far as costs. You know, we wouldn't want all the change. You want on a go-forward basis as opposed to having to change all the signs out right now. We reviewed there was a question asked about the audible pedestrian signals at 10th and 2nd Avenue, the intersection with the changes that have been discussed at operations, and I believe last meeting here with the signals and how the advanced left turns or banning left turns, and basically the audible signals will not be affected in any way by those changes. We reviewed a site plan for a new use for a building at 1290 3rd Avenue East. It was the former Bruce Gray Child and Family Services, used to be the Beaver Lumber for those at 13th Street and 3rd Avenue East. Anyway, it's being converted to use for dwellings for community living, so the committee endorsed that as well. And that, Your Worship, were all the notable things from the minutes. So I would move adoption of those minutes for the Accessibility Committee.
Approval, thank you. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next is minutes from City Hall Accommodation Ad Hoc Committee.
Thank you, Your Worship. We had a discussion on heating walkways and stairs outside City Hall, but the cost to supply and operate were too high to pursue. Water bottle fill stations. The committee decided to keep all 3 stations as we were unable to retrieve a full refund to transfer to the Bayshore. That was rectified at budget meetings last Friday. We're certainly not going to open up discussion on that again. Furniture RFP was issued on October 24th. And only one proposal was received, and it was over budget. There was a letter and a phone call from local vendors regarding concerns with the specifications in the RFP. The city's purchasing bylaw does allow us to reissue an RFP where there's only one bid and the bid is over budget. And that's exactly what we did. Just to note, the committee along with staff have made every possible effort to give our locals the opportunity to be a part of this renovation. Progress report, we've had a real good 2 to 3 weeks of progression. The steel installation is nearly complete and workers will begin to tarp the building in preparation for winter weather. Some of the work during the next couple of weeks include the elevator shaft foundation walls poured, plumbing and washroom rough-ins, electrical rough-ins, and masonry. Kristen Schreider's doing a great job staying on top of things and regularly sending project updates to our committee members. And with that, I would move approval of those minutes.
Good, thank you. All in favor? That is carried. Number 3 is Operations Committee from November 23rd.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. The committee met. We had a deputation there regarding the Bayshore race to support the Ontario Hospital Foundation. They were concerned over the road project being there, but we've assured them that we would do our very best to have it basically completed before their run took place. Under engineering, we had the issue of cameras, and we had discussed the privacy issue and freedom of information, etc. As a result, we have asked for further information, and we will get a staff report back with further analysis. We committed the Public Works and Engineering with the 10th Street corridor. We talked about the changes. We talked about not implementing them during the winter months, as it could pose safety risks. And what will happen is that the report will be received, and implementation of the intended operation with improvements and signage will probably occur in early spring. Engineering Services reported on school crossing guard assignments update, and we're going to basically be at status quo at this time. That's about it for this meeting, unless there's any questions. Our transit rider is up. It's up a little bit this year, but you read the article in the paper, which was very positive, and it showed an increase in ridership, although the free passes that were handed out in September had really no bearing on it, according to Chris. But it seems to be, and the effect of the college strike would certainly not help our ridership, but we have had an increase in ridership. And I will move these minutes.
Move approval. Okay, question from Councillor Lemon.
Well, I think one thing that's going to benefit ridership in the long term is the new shelters that have been put up in a number of areas. I've had feedback from people. Some people wonder why some of the things have been done. As an example, at 12th Street and 1st Avenue West, there's a pad there, and that's so that the ramp can be extended and sit down on something solid, which it needs to do. So I really feel that those moves are positive and make people feel positive about transit, and that helps ridership.
Good. Call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Minutes of closed meetings, and we have none. We're down to other business, and I'm going to start with Deputy Mayor Wright. The clerks forgot to put in the agenda the report from Grey County, so we'll put it in here on...
A very short report. Tomorrow night is the inaugural session at the county, and it's open to all. You're all invited to come up, and it will be, we will have a new warden tomorrow night. And I also brought back with me presentations that we had at our meeting, the official draft official plan recolor gray update, and also the draft policy discussion papers that were in there, and also the paved shoulder policy update, which comes at a very good time because of the provincial announcement of the $90 million going into bicycle. I thought that our community services director would like some bedtime reading, so I'm going to give this to her after, and she can familiarize herself with all the stuff that will have a bearing on the city.
Oh,
That's it.
Councillor, demoted again. Mr. Becking.
Thank you, Your Worship. I received correspondence from the Minister of Transportation this morning. As a matter of fact, the city will be receiving $113,758.27 or something like that, which represents 80% of eligible expenditures for expansion of our cycling network within the city. So, a little piece of good news for a change.
Good. Go ahead.
So if the warden's inauguration's tomorrow, who's the warden?
We won't know until after the inauguration.
Oh, geez, that's intense.
There's a runoff this year. There's a competition. There's two people running.
Mary.
The suspense.
Go ahead, Mary.
Can I ask for details on that? Because we didn't get an invitation to it.
Yeah, you can go tomorrow.
But it's open to
What
the
time is
public.
it?
It's open to the public.
I didn't see it.
So what time is it tomorrow night?
7:30.
In the new council chambers. Up there.
Thank you.
Good. Other business. Councillor Dodd, I think you had two things that the clerks forgot to put on the agenda.
Thank you, Worship. I got these nice big pieces of paper so I can hold them up. Next Wednesday here at the Bayshore Community Center, we have the Parks, Recreation and Facilities Draft Master Plan. There. Woo.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. All right.
Time?
Oh, sorry, that is at 7 o'clock. 6:30. 6:30, all right. I told Pam to get me a T-shirt so I could just wear it. And the next we have the Cultural Awards. This is upcoming in February, annual event. It's always a lot of fun. Nominations, the deadline is for December 8th. So we also have a stack of cards here that Pam has also advised me that I am to distribute to all of us, everyone in this room, so no one's leaving without these. And we have to give away to people other than the people that are in this room. So don't run away when we're done. Those are my minutes. Or not even minutes, those are just my reports.
It only took you a minute.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Lemon, I think you had something that the clerk forgot to put on the agenda.
No, not on the agenda, but one thing, every year the food bank has a great need in our community. It's unfortunate that need is there, but it's real and it exists. And one of the things the Royal Canadian Legion is doing on every Tuesday night from now till Christmas, and possibly beyond, there's a bingo game that's $1, and 100% of the proceeds go towards a check to the food bank from the Legion, which will help them acquire the food that they need for families in need and people in need. And I think that's a very positive thing. The other thing that has been going on is the Legion gets a lot of requests for money from various groups. And when we had Breakfast with Santa, we had the junior or peewee attacks, and a check was given to them for their assistance with that event. And this is encouraging teams who want money to put something back into it, and it's a good mutually beneficial thing at our Branch 6 of the Royal Canadian Legion.
Good, thank you. Councillor McManaman.
Thank you, Worship. Just if I could ask the city manager, there's been, I believe, at least 2 letters to the editor in the local newspaper that the city intends to tear down the jail and the courthouse, which is not correct. I believe there was another letter in today that the First Lady sort of retracted that statement. But anyway, just so we can all be clear, what is the city's intention as far as the courthouse and the jail?
Thank you, Councillor McManaman. Certainly, the city's intention is not to tear down the city courthouse. What council approved in the budget was to bring in a consultant to give us information on what we might do with the jail portion of that facilities, and part of that information would be perhaps an approximation of what it would cost someone to remove that particular building from that site. So the jail, we will have an estimate. Whether we see that work through in the future, or at least as people do and come and talk to us about that site, often they do not see an adaptive reuse for the jail. That's just what they do not see. And people who are looking at it like to have some definitive cost estimate of what it may cost them to remove the jail. We would be able to have that information available to them. But I can reiterate at this time, there are no plans for us to obtain any cost for removing the courthouse. Council has made it clear. They certainly would love to see someone take over that courthouse. It needs to have to be with an adaptive reuse. That will be a challenge, but that's still our intent to move that forward. And I can tell you our real estate agent has told us that he has had some people interested in it. So again, we're encouraged, no promises.
Thank you. It's just extremely important to differentiate for people. The jail is one thing, the courthouse is another. Even though they're right beside each other, they are 2 different things. Thank you.
Councillor Lemon, quickly.
Yeah, clarification. When we get that cost estimate, would it be possible to break it out, so one for the jail removal and the other for the courtyard removal? Or some people may want to keep that courtyard in an adaptive reuse. You know what I mean, the walls around it.
We're not looking at anything but the jail house.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and I just want to cover off a couple of things that I've done. Sunday, of course, was the CFOS Sun-Times 78th Christmas Fund broadcast. 7 hours of local talent, which is kind of neat. A lot of kids get their first performance start on there. I believe they're still available to receive money and donations. It goes to 21 charities throughout Graham Bruce to help different organizations that help members of our Graham Bruce community, and it's a good thing. Right after that, I had to run to a bookstore launch, a book launch at Ginger Press for Trail of the Griffin, a D.B. Murphy, which some of us will know, has had 9 books before about D.B. Murphy. And it's written by some guy named Richard Thomas. Ninth book? Eighth book. Eighth book, starting with the play that was on, I'm looking for a name of the...
Gashead Willie.
Gashead Willie, there we go. So, same detective, same fun stories, and that's for sale, so congratulations, Richard. Coming up, I know we've got symphonies this Saturday night. City Band is here, I think, this Sunday, the 10th, if I've got my dates correct. There's lots of music for Christmas throughout the community, lots of fun things to do, so I hope everyone gets out and enjoys the Northern Lights and finds some activities in Owen Sound. So with that, that ends other business. Need a motion.
Moved by myself, Councillor Gregg, that the committee rise and report.
All in favor? That's carried. Formal session, number 14, resolution.
Moved by myself, Councillor Gregg, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that the action taken in committee of the whole in considering public meetings, deputations, public question period, matters arising from correspondence, reports, matters tabled, motions for which notice was previously given, and other business be confirmed by this council.
And all in favor? That is carried. Notices of motion. Seeing none. New business, we have none. Bylaws.
Through you, your worship, the bylaws listed for approval on tonight's agenda include the confirmatory bylaw, a bylaw to adopt the dedicated spaces for businesses and municipal lots policy, a bylaw to amend the waste management bylaw to prohibit household waste from public waste receptacles, a bylaw to execute a collective agreement with QP 1189, and a bylaw to amend the traffic bylaw respecting the removal of the loading zone located at 769 4th Avenue East.
Good, thank you.
Moved by myself, Councillor Gregg, seconded by Councillor Kepke, that bylaw numbers 2017-173, 174, 175, 176, and 2017-177 be passed and enacted.
You just jumping the gun? Call the question, all in favor? That is carried. So that completes our business for tonight. I've got 9:32 approximately. Good meeting, everyone. Thanks. We're adjourned.